Imagine cutting your hand and knowing there is no doctor, no hospital, no antibiotics, and no painkiller. Even a small wound could become infected. And yet, ancient humans survived for thousands of years. So how? Did they simply get lucky? Not exactly. Ancient humans had something we often underestimate: knowledge passed down through generations. They observed which plants helped, which foods made them sick, and which natural materials could be used on wounds. But there was a much bigger problem: infection. Without antibiotics, an infected wound could become deadly. So ancient humans had to rely on their environment and sometimes incredibly simple methods to fight back. They used things they could find around them: plants, leaves, tree resins, honey, and other natural substances. Some of these remedies may actually have had useful medical properties. But here's the shocking part. They didn't understand bacteria. They didn't know why some treatments worked. They only knew, we tried this and the person survived. And that knowledge was remembered and passed to the next generation. But natural remedies weren't their only secret, because ancient humans also had another powerful weapon. And that's where the story gets even more interesting. Bilkul Part 2 ko kafi zyada long raktahin ta ke tumhari full-length video properly develop ho. Part 1 KN naturally continue karahahun. How did ancient humans survive without medicine? Part 2. What did they actually use? Script. Hook. Imagine waking up with a deep wound. There's no emergency room, no antibiotics, no antiseptic cream, no painkillers, and definitely no doctor waiting to treat you. For us, that sounds almost impossible. But for ancient humans, this was normal life. And somehow, they learned how to survive. But here's the fascinating part. Ancient humans weren't completely helpless without modern medicine. They had their own form of medicine. It was primitive, sometimes dangerous, but in some cases, surprisingly effective. And much of it came from one place: nature. For thousands of years, humans watched the world around them. They noticed that animals sometimes ate certain plants when they were sick. They noticed that some plants caused pain, while others seemed to calm it. They discovered that some leaves could be placed on wounds, some tree resins could be used on the skin, and some natural substances could help preserve food and prevent it from becoming dangerous. But they didn't have laboratories to test any of this. They learned through observation, experience, and trial and error. One generation discovered something, then taught it to the next. And slowly, humans built a primitive medical knowledge system. Wounds were one of their biggest problems. A cut might look harmless today. You wash it, put on some antiseptic, maybe add a bandage, and move on. But thousands of years ago, a wound could become a death sentence. If dirt entered the wound and infection developed, there were very few options. Ancient people therefore learned that cleaning wounds mattered. They used water when available. They sometimes used natural substances such as honey or plant-based materials. Honey is especially interesting because it has properties that can inhibit the growth of some microorganisms. Ancient people didn't know about microbes. They didn't know what bacteria were, but they could observe something simple. Some treatments seemed to help wounds heal, and when something worked, they remembered it. Then came medicinal plants. Plants became one of humanity's earliest sources of medicine. Ancient people experimented with roots, leaves, seeds, flowers, bark, and other parts of plants. Some were used for pain, some for stomach problems, some for inflammation, and others were used to treat wounds or infections. But here's the dangerous side. Not every plant was medicine. Some were poisonous, some could cause severe reactions, and some could even kill. So knowing the difference between a useful plant and a deadly one could literally mean the difference between life and death. Imagine living in a world where you couldn't simply search Google, "Is this plant safe?" You had to learn from experience, from elders, and sometimes from very painful mistakes. And what about toothache? Here's another problem ancient humans couldn't escape: tooth pain. Imagine having a badly infected tooth and no dentist, no anesthesia, no modern dental tools, no antibiotics. Ancient humans still suffered from tooth decay and dental infections. Archaeologists have even found evidence showing that prehistoric people attempted primitive dental treatments. Some ancient communities used tools to remove damaged parts of teeth. Others relied on natural substances to reduce pain. But if an infection became severe, there was no modern treatment waiting for them. This shows us something important. Ancient survival wasn't about avoiding every disease. It was about finding ways to survive despite them. And then there was fire. Fire wasn't just for cooking, it transformed human survival. Cooking food made many foods easier to digest. It also reduced some of the dangers associated with eating raw food. Fire provided warmth, protection from predators, light at night, and a place where humans could gather and share knowledge. In a world without hospitals, the group itself was part of the survival system. If someone became injured, other people could help. If someone knew which plant was useful, they could teach others. If an elder had survived an illness years earlier, their knowledge could become extremely valuable. Human survival wasn't just individual, it was collective. But there's something even more important. Ancient humans didn't survive because they were stronger than every disease. They survived because humans are incredible learners. They adapted, they experimented, they remembered, and they passed information forward. A discovery made by one person could eventually benefit an entire community. Think about that. One ancient human discovers that a particular plant helps with a certain problem. They tell their family. Their family tells the next generation. Generations later, that knowledge becomes part of traditional medicine. And eventually, some of these ancient observations become the foundation for medical practices that humans continue studying today. But there was still one massive problem. What happened when the treatment didn't work? What happened when an infection became too serious? What happened when someone suffered a broken bone? What happened during childbirth? And perhaps the most frightening question of all, how did ancient humans deal with diseases they couldn't understand or treat? Because sometimes nature wasn't enough, and that's where ancient humans had to rely on something even more powerful than plants or tools, their own bodies and their ability to adapt. But there's one final part of this story that completely changes how we think about ancient survival. How did the human body itself become better at surviving disease, injury, hunger, in extreme environments? And were ancient humans actually more resilient than we are today? Bill Cole Part 3. Kobe Long detailed our strong ending, Kasath Ruktihain, Teaki Part 1, +2 +3, Milkarike, proper long-form video banjay. Part 3, how did their bodies survive? Script, hook. So if ancient humans had no hospitals, no antibiotics, no modern surgery, no vaccines, and no advanced medicine, why didn't humanity simply disappear? The answer is more fascinating than you might think. Because ancient humans weren't just surviving with primitive medicine. They were surviving through adaptation, behavior, cooperation, and an incredible ability to learn. And this is where the story gets really interesting. Imagine living thousands of years ago. Every day you face dangers that most of us rarely think about. A deep cut, a broken bone, a poisonous plant, a dangerous animal, extreme cold, extreme heat, hunger, dehydration, and diseases you don't even understand. There was no ambulance coming. There was no pharmacy around the corner. If something went seriously wrong, your survival often depended on the people around you. And that changed everything. Humans learned to cooperate. One of humanity's greatest survival advantages wasn't physical strength, it was cooperation. Ancient humans lived in groups. If someone was injured, others could help them. They could bring food, protect them from predators, keep them warm, help them move, and watch over them while they recovered. This is extremely important because an injured person who couldn't hunt didn't necessarily have to die. The group could keep them alive, and that may have given injured humans something many animals don't have to the same degree: time to recover. And some injuries really did heal. Archaeologists have discovered ancient human skeletons showing evidence of serious injuries that had healed. Broken bones, severe trauma, even injuries that would have been extremely difficult to survive. And when a skeleton shows that an injury healed, there's an important clue hidden inside it. The person survived long enough for their body to repair the damage. But there's another question. How did they survive while they were injured? They couldn't simply order food. They couldn't go to work remotely. They couldn't call an ambulance. Someone had to help them. That means ancient human communities weren't just groups of people living together. They were survival networks. Fire changed everything, and then there was fire. Fire gave humans something incredibly valuable: control over their environment. It provided warmth, light, protection, and most importantly, it allowed humans to cook food. Cooking can make many foods easier to digest and can reduce some pathogens and parasites associated with raw foods. That doesn't mean cooked food made ancient humans immune to disease. It didn't, but it gave them another survival advantage. And as humans became better at controlling fire, they became better at surviving environments that would otherwise be extremely difficult. Food was medicine too. Ancient humans also had to understand something we sometimes forget. Food isn't just about hunger. What you eat affects your body. Humans learned which foods were safe, which were poisonous, which could provide energy, which could be stored, and which could help them survive difficult seasons. They didn't know about vitamins. They didn't know about protein. They didn't know about calories. But through generations of experience, they learned what kept their communities alive. But did ancient humans have better medicine than us? Not really. Modern medicine is vastly more powerful. We understand bacteria, viruses, genetics, the immune system. We have vaccines, antibiotics, anesthesia, surgery, imaging, and countless other medical technologies. So don't make the mistake of thinking ancient humans were healthier because they didn't use medicine. Life was extremely dangerous. Infant mortality was high. Infections could be deadly. Childbirth could be dangerous. A simple injury could become life-threatening, and many people died from diseases we can now treat or prevent. So if ancient humans had such difficult lives, why are we here? Survival doesn't mean everyone survived. This is probably the most important part. Ancient humans didn't survive because they were invincible. They survived because enough people survived to have children and pass their knowledge and genes to the next generation. Generation after generation, humans faced challenges. Some adaptations helped, some behaviors helped, some technologies helped, and knowledge accumulated. Stone tools became better. Fire became controlled. Shelters became better. Clothing became better. Food preparation became better. And eventually, medicine became more sophisticated. Human survival was not one giant breakthrough. It was millions of tiny discoveries. Think about this. The first human who discovered that a certain plant could help with a particular problem probably didn't understand chemistry. The person who learned how to make fire didn't understand combustion. The person who learned how to set a broken limb didn't understand modern anatomy. The people who cared for the injured didn't understand modern trauma medicine. But they observed, they experimented, they remembered, and they taught others. That process continued for thousands of years, and eventually, those observations became something much bigger: medicine. From survival to modern medicine. Humanity didn't suddenly invent medicine one day. It evolved slowly. First came observation, then traditional remedies, then written medical knowledge, then more systematic understanding of the human body, then scientific experimentation, then modern medicine. And today, if you get an infection that might once have killed someone, you can potentially receive treatment within hours. That's one of the biggest differences between our world and theirs. But here's the most shocking part. Ancient humans didn't know how fragile their world was. They didn't know that microscopic organisms were everywhere. They didn't know why infections spread. They didn't know what viruses were. They didn't know about DNA. They didn't know about the immune system. And yet, they kept learning. Every generation inherited the discoveries of the previous one. And that's perhaps humanity's greatest survival tool. Not our teeth, not our muscles, not our speed, our ability to learn and pass knowledge forward. The real secret of ancient survival. So how did ancient humans survive without modern medicine? The answer isn't simply, they were tougher. It was much more complicated. They used nature. They controlled fire. They learned which foods were safe. They developed traditional remedies. They cared for injured members of their groups. They adapted to their environments. They learned from mistakes. And most importantly, they shared knowledge. Their world was dangerous. But humans were constantly learning how to make it a little less dangerous. Final ending. So the next time you take an antibiotic, visit a doctor, or put a simple bandage on a tiny cut. Remember this, you're using the result of thousands of years of human experimentation, survival, and discovery. Ancient humans didn't have modern medicine, but they had something that started it all, curiosity. They saw a problem and tried to solve it. They failed, they learned, they tried again. And eventually, those tiny discoveries helped build the medical world we live in today. Humans didn't survive because the ancient world was safe. Humans survived because they learned how to survive an unsafe world. And perhaps that's the most powerful part of human evolution. We didn't just adapt to the world. We learned how to change it. This is beyond evolution.